This is the second half of Class 3 in the online training Developing Templates for LawHelp Interactive. In this session, we're going to go through some basics of PDF templates and how you create them and how they behave and when they make sense to use as an alternative to Word templates. You'll remember in the first class we took a brief look at an example of a PDF template that's found in the Demonstration Templates library that installs with HotDocs. And we ran this and we noticed that when you run it, it produces an interview very similar to the interview you see with any kind of a template, Word or otherwise. But when you assemble the document, you generate a PDF as opposed to a Word processable or editable document. And that's sometimes useful, sometimes not. Behind the scenes, if you edit one of these things, you're taken to a collateral HotDocs tool called HotDocs Automator, and this allows you to construct PDF templates to layer fields on top of the underlying boilerplate and then control what gets inserted, whether it's a response from a user or a computed value that you control through a script in HotDocs. Very powerful technology. You can handle tables, you can handle various kinds of text fields, yes, no checkboxes, and we'll see some examples of this in today's session. So without further ado, let me just close this and go back to our library. Let's go to the library we've been working on, the HotDocs Developer Training Library, LawHelp Interactive Developer Training. And last time I was with you, we did the divorce petition, started work on that. In lesson 2, Bart took us more deeply into some of the features involved in editing and automating Word templates. But let's create a new template, a PDF template, to illustrate this process. And this is going to be close to what you'll be asked to do in your homework following this class. So follow along, and then the homework materials will describe the specific steps I'm doing that you can reproduce at your convenience. So first step is to click on New Template. So we're creating a new template. Again, HotDocs defaults to a docx template, but we want to make it a PDF template. So we choose PDF as the type. Now we need to give it a file name. Once again, you can just stick it in your master template directory library. I'm going to call it FL100-2 because I've done a number of these in past trainings. But FL100 is probably fine for your purposes. And then when you click in the title field, as before, you'll get a title corresponding to the file name you've used. Okay, so this is going to be the name and the file name of the template we're creating. Description is optional. In this case, we want to base it upon a actual PDF form that's made available by the court. So we're going to be automating an example of a California form, the FL100, and you've been asked to put a copy of that into your My Documents folder, which I also should have done. And let me get back to my documents and find FL100. Here we go. So that now has been specified as the source document for this new template. So here we go. We're ready with the new template process. We've given all the key parameters. And when I click OK, HotDocs is going to take that template and begin the process. Now you'll notice with certain PDF templates, depending upon how they're configured, if they're enabled for filling and saving, HotDocs is not going to necessarily replicate that functionality. So click OK there. And you may have to do that twice. And then here we go. We now have a HPT, a HotDocs PDF template, open, unautomated so far, existing in our HotDocs Automator environment, and also, by the way, over here in our library where we can access that template. What we want to do now is to begin providing some functionality. And the first place will be to put in the names of the parties. So here on the form we have marriage of petitioner and respondent. We want to put the petitioner's name and the respondent's names here. So we're going to create fields. You can do this a variety of ways. You can just double click if you like. That'll create a field of a certain size. And I can now extend that, move it around, and get it just about where I want it. And that'll serve well as a container for the name of the petitioner, which we're going to associate a variable with in a second. While we're at this, let's create a similar field for the respondent. So I'm just going to leave it highlighted, press Control-C to copy and Control-V to paste. And HotDocs now has put a copy of that field right on top of the first one, which I can just use my down arrow to move or my arrow to move. So now I can click away. I've got two fields. They have nothing in them yet, but these are now two defined locations on my PDF form that I can associate variables with. So how do we put a variable on this field? Well, you can click on the one you're concerned with. Let's do petitioner first. And if I right click on that field, I've got a context sensitive menu and I can specify a variable. So let's do that. So here we're going to create a variable. This is familiar from the word automation you've seen. And we'll call this one petitioner name TE. And that is now inserted in that location. We can do the same on the respondents. So I'll just right click, variable, and we'll say respondent name TE. Okay. Now, as before, if it was important to you that these be capitalized in this context, you can control the local field properties. I won't do that right now, but that is all controllable just like in a Word template. Let's do something a little more interesting. So in this case, we're simply eliciting texts from the user and putting the answers in these fields. A more common scenario, or a common scenario in PDF templates and court forms especially, are the presence of checkboxes. And there's various ways to handle these. You want obviously to ask the user which of these three kinds of petitions this one is, and check the associated box. So to start on this, you want to create fields for each of these boxes. You can do that simply by double clicking inside. So I'm double clicking 1, 2, 3. They turn a slight yellow. I now have three checkbox fields, and you'll notice if I go to the properties of any of these, let me go to the last one and go field properties, you get to see the various characteristics a field can have in HotDocs Automator. By default, they're edit fields like the ones we just did up here, unless they're of a particular small size, in which case they default to checkbox. Now, for present purposes, we want these to be checkboxes because we want them to behave in a special way so they get checked or unchecked based upon the user's answer to a question. So I'm going to change this to checkbox. Now if I use the arrow at the bottom, I can move backwards in the list of fields and do the same for this one and do the same for this one. And notice they've now turned blue. So we have three checkbox type fields here in addition to two edit type fields. And you've got this field properties browser or property window that you can leave open and move around your template as you desire to change the properties for any given piece. To handle the checking of these three boxes, we're going to do something a little fancy. We're going to group these as a logical group, make three checkboxes that are all controlled by a single variable, and then we're going to associate a multiple choice variable with that group. So let's do that. So I've got the first one highlighted, but if I hold down my control key while I click, I can highlight multiple fields simultaneously. So now three of these fields are selected. What I want to do is right click on any of them and choose group. You'll notice that when I group these fields, a little red outline border appears around them to signify that it's a group. And now I'm going to be controlling the properties of this group, of this so-called run-on group. So if I create a variable for the run-on group, make it a multiple choice, and we're going to go over here and edit the properties of this multiple choice variables because we need to specify the options. Let's give it a name, and the name will be petition type MC. May as well do a prompt while we're at it. Otherwise, we'll get that MC for the user. And we'll have three options. And you can see over here the options are dissolution of marriage, legal separation, and nullity of marriage. Let's assume those in fact are the three and only three choices. So we've got a multiple choice variable that's been defined as choices corresponding to the checkboxes we're associating it with in the same order. That's important because you want to have the right things checked. And now when I say OK, and I now specify the field, here these three checkboxes are now associated with that multiple choice variable. We'll test this in a few minutes, but let's do one more example. There's a date field down here. If I go to the date of marriage and I double click next to it, once again HotDocs does an approximate job creating a field for me. I can move it around. I can expand it by just dragging one of these little controls. And let's highlight it. It's now looking for the properties of this. We're going to go make a date variable, and we'll call it marriage date DA. And that now has been handled. While we're at it, one thing you can do just to illustrate is you can control the layout of these fields. In something like this, I'd be inclined to center this horizontally so the date is put in the middle of that field. It's a little more readable. But you can control lots of things about the merge behavior of variables. The horizontal alignment, vertical. You can rotate them if you have to deal with some sort of a field that's vertical. Control all kinds of aspects of their margins. You can also control the fonts that are used and many other aspects. Okay, so we've got a very basic template, and let's go and test this. So I can leave my field properties open if I like. Let me just close it to get a few things off the screen. Before we go much further, once again, as with a Word template, you've got an associated component file that's in existence behind the scenes. If you want to see it while you're editing, which is always a good idea, you can click on this icon in the ribbon called Component Manager. You can dock it like you can in Word. So now we've got visibility into our four variables we created, as well as the template that uses those variables to control the behavior of the field. One last thing to do and be aware of: when you're doing a PDF template, you want to go to the file properties. So click on the component file properties here, interview tab, and you'll notice that neither of these boxes are checked. Ordinarily you would use a custom interview like we've done with the Word template and create an interview computation to control the behavior. But at least for present purposes, let's just generate a default interview. That means HotDocs will look to the form to decide what information it needs in what order and just prompt us through. So that's important if you want to test this and have it behave properly. Okay, so we've set up some variables, we've specified the component file properties. Now if we press the Test Assemble button, the green arrow here on the ribbon, HotDocs will ask us for some information, including the petition type, and we'll make it 3/3/1999. And now if I go to the form, you'll see, voila, HotDocs has done exactly what I said. It's checked the boxes, it's put the petitioner and respondent's name in, and put the marriage date in the field. So that illustrates a very basic HotDocs template. That's about all you need to worry about for your homework. But I'm going to show you some more advanced examples. While I'm at it, by the way, one thing I noticed, those X's in these checkbox fields were left aligned. I think they'd look better if they were right aligned or centered. So if I go to them and go to field properties, I can center those as well and the next time this thing is assembled, the X's, whichever X is chosen, will be in the middle of the box rather than sitting off to the left. Lots of power, lots of functionality you can invoke. So in a nutshell, that's the first step of creating a PDF template. When I close Automator, it's going to ask me if I want to save. Of course I do. This has not been saved. And now I can close my component library as well. And this template exists in my developer library for further work at the appropriate time. What I want to do with our remaining time today is just give you some preview of advanced features you might run into in dealing with PDF templates, such as how do you make fields conditional, and how do you deal with repeating information, tables, overflows, addenda, of that sort. Before I do that, let me briefly take you into an overview of PDF templates. This is from a session Bart and I did on one of our monthly calls with LawHelp Interactive. You can find this, by the way, and all the other materials about PDF forms, including some pretty advanced stuff, in the Resource Center. So I encourage you to find this particular PDF if you're so inclined, and you can link to all the materials from within here. This is what I've just pretty much gone through, the basics of Automator, how you construct fields, variables. We'll talk about conditions in a second. The field properties dialog box we looked at. You saw a group, one kind of a group, the run-on group, to handle those three multiple choice checkboxes. Overflow is very important. I'll show that in a minute. An important consideration is, how do you decide when to use a PDF template versus a Word, RTF, or DocX template? And this table illustrates some of the major differences. As we've seen, when you're working with a Word template, you automate it inside of Word. When you're working with a PDF template, you start with Adobe Reader or Acrobat, and you automate it inside of HotDocs Automator, as opposed to HotDocs Developer, which you use in connection with Word for a Word template. The process of automating in the case of Word templates is inserting variables and instructions right on the surface of the text and scripting things in the component file. With a PDF template, you're creating fields, delimited areas on the face of a form, and inserting variables and instructions in those fields. Similar but significantly different. With a Word template, when material expands, the underlying Word document will expand or contract. There's no concept necessarily of overflow. Whereas a PDF template, by definition, is a fixed format underlying form, and if something doesn't fit, it has to be dealt with, it has to be resized or overflowed. And there's also this notion of replacing static content. So if you get a form that has changed, you can swap in a new version of the static content underneath the fields you've created, as opposed to having to redo them, and only in some cases have to create some new fields or move things around. When you're trying to decide which of these makes sense to use, these are some of the considerations. What are you starting with? Do you have a Word document to begin with, or is it already a PDF? If it is a PDF, it's generally pretty hard to counterfeit it inside of Word. So that's a lot of extra effort. And so that would alone be a reason generally to use a PDF template as the format. Does the court or the agency or the recipient require it to be in a particular format? Does it have to look exactly like the starting document? If so, that leads you towards a PDF. Is the content expressible ordinarily in this fixed form, or does it by nature need to be expansive and change its behavior? If it's the latter, that's more of a Word type of template. Will it look weird if you try to force it onto fixed locations as opposed to letting it flow in a Word document? If there's a lot of checkboxes, that's generally easier to deal with in PDF. And then, will the users want to edit the document? Do you want them to? So those are some of the considerations. There are a bunch of trade-offs. This little table illustrates some. One consideration is accessibility. will the user be at a machine that has a current version of Word on it? More likely, it'll always have a version of PDF Reader. So generally, PDF is a little more accessible. However, it's not editable, so you can't edit the form ordinarily, let alone the answers in the form. Sometimes these are more difficult to author in Word or PDF depending upon the nature of the form and its logic. So something you need to take into account. I mentioned checkboxes being one example of that. How much do you want to be able to suppress irrelevant material? If you've got, a PDF form that's got a table in it with 10 rows, it's always going to have 10 rows. You're not going to be able to suppress those rows if there's only 2 answers, whereas in Word you can do that. And one last consideration that's becoming more and more important for e-filing. Most e-filing systems now require documents to be in PDF format. So be aware of that. One last twist here is that on LawHelp Interactive now, you can have a RTF or a Word template that's set to generate a PDF at the end. So you can in some ways have the best of both worlds. Lots of choices, lots of trade-offs, and some of the challenges I'll leave to you to read at some other point. But I encourage you again to check out these resources and expand your education if you find yourself doing a lot of PDF templates. All right, I promised I'd show you some examples of more advanced features. Let me go to another library. This is one I haven't worked on for a while, but it's a set of order forms for juvenile courts in California that illustrates some of these concepts. So here we've got a collection. All of these are PDFs. There's an underlying cover sheet PDF that doesn't seem to say much because we just construct some text on top of it. I'll show you in a second. Then there's a number of these specified required forms in California that have the typical kind of constellation of text fields and checkboxes and tables and other kinds of characteristics. And this is a reasonably common scenario where you've got multiple forms, some of which need to be included all the time, some of which are only included under certain circumstances, and various kinds of attachments that get added based upon, again, the answers to questions. So if I go to the top form here and edit this to bring this up in HotDocs Automator, you'll notice this is a blank page. We're putting some text right here. This is a computation that's going to calculate the text that goes here. And then we're inserting these other forms. These will be concatenated together as part of one master PDF. But each of these is only inserted if in fact the user has specified their insertion. So if you look at the bottom of the window I'm in right now, as I hover over a field, it says condition if. And each of these is conditioned upon some condition of assembly. Let me run this just to illustrate the basic concept. So I'm doing a test assemble. We've got a typical HotDocs interview. This is going to be gathering information about a case to populate various fields. It's got some repeat dialogues you'll be learning about in class number 4. And then near the end, it's got a forms to generate. So these actually are the true-false variables that control whether or not a given form is included in a particular run of the system. So if I check the first 2, my form document's going to have a cover sheet with some unanswered questions in it. Of course, I haven't answered anything. And then it's going to string behind it the forms I've selected. So a common configuration for PDFs is this multiple template set approach. Let me go back here and let's go into one. So if I want to look at, say, this first one here, double click on it. This is an insert field. I'm going to edit this. Now Automator has got both the index cover sheet that I had originally opened, and as a second window it's got my the form I've just chosen. So this is a reasonably common configuration. You've got a bunch of fields. Some of these are text fields. Some of these are calculations computed based upon users' choices. We've got dates. We've got um, an example here of a table. So this is a table grouping that combines at least three lines of potential parents of a particular child. And then inside each row of this table, there's a text field, and then there's a multiple choice option that selects mother or father, as the case may be. Uh, this is another example of a multiple choice. Actually, it's a true-false variable where the true value will choose the first box, and the false value will choose the second. We'll check the second. This is another table. Child name, birth date, who has custody, etc. And all of these pieces are totally controlled by the characteristics of the fields that we're on. So looking at this one, you'll notice this, if I hover over it on the bottom, it tells me what the name of the variable is. It's got some controls for its formatting, and it's got a condition. So let me just bring up the field properties for this field to show that example, and we'll talk briefly about some other aspects. So here on the field properties, we have a variable as usual. It's got some field specific formatting associated with it, and it's got a condition. So this will tell us only in the circumstances where this particular text should be shown, should we even include what the user said. And this can be controlled through a expression editor, very similar to the if fields you've seen elsewhere. Again, I'm just showing you this for concept, I'm not expecting you to follow along or do this at this stage, but to give you an idea of the power that is behind a PDF template. While we're here, we've already seen edit boxes and check boxes. If we went back to our index field, you notice these fields here, these are examples of control fields. They're green. That means these are not used to actually present anything, put any information on the face of the template, whether it's text or a checkbox. These are to control behavior, and in this case to control the insertion of subsidiary subtemplates. You can also create a resource field type that doesn't have much applicability in the LawHelp Interactive world. We've seen mostly text display types, even for the checkboxes, but you can create images, barcodes, you can circle things, you can strike through things, again control pretty much all the behavior you might need to worry about to automate a graphical form. We've been to the layout field. Overflow I just want to touch on again conceptually. So if we were here in, let me get to my proper location. I'm going to go to our second form. So here, if for some reason the user got very verbose and typed in more words than we can realistically fit, you can do things like to shrink the answer so that you specify a lower threshold for font size, and HotDocs will dutifully shrink the user's response until it fits, if it can, down to the minimum font size you specify. You can also control having the response sent to an addendum, either as a whole or splitting it in half or in parts, and control various aspects of the behavior of that addendum. So lots of power and lots of potential complexity to be aware of, but those are all controllable within the happy world of HotDocs PDF automation. There is one last tab called Additional. This controls the tab order, and I'll just mention that this comes up in the context of where you've got a non-traditional table in a form. Most tables you'll have information nicely arranged on each row, so each row has corresponding data for each iteration of a repeat. But some forms are really devious, and they split the information across rows. And in order to tell HotDocs logically what's in a logical row, you can use tab order to specify rows and columns. And this can be a lot of fun and frustration, but it's there if you need it. As is true in HotDocs generally, if I press F1 at any point, it's going to take me to a context-sensitive help system. So be aware that help is generally a click away or a button push away, and all the properties I was describing are described in much greater detail here. For instance, how to rotate text in a field. So that's a quick tour of HotDocs Automator. Go forth and create one of your own. Get a little sense of how these work, and as your project requires, delve more deeply into the features that are available in HotDocs Automator.